For the last 30, 35 years, I've been increasingly concerned that we as a species have created a crisis for ourselves at the large scale. And I spent 25 years persuading senior executives in public and private organizations to see what I was seeing, what I thought I was seeing, and to see if we couldn't change course at the large scale. And then in 2017, I was asked by the biggest insurance company in Africa if I would help them to reflect on a major wildfire disaster that had happened in South Africa, where many, many properties were destroyed, lives were lost, and a huge amount of insurance cost was entailed. And I'd never done anything quite like this before, and I was fascinated by the process of bringing together 40 people who had been involved in responding to this wildfire event and helping them to think back over why did it happen, what actually happened, how we responded work, and what have we learned. And it was such a rich series of workshops and conversations. And I thought, well, this is actually aligning my larger concern for us as a civilization with very specific events which bring out a whole lot of qualities and challenges and so on, and questions. And so almost immediately after that had happened, we in Cape Town, where I live, slid into the severe drought of 2016, 2018, known sort of commonly as day zero by the end, because there was a real risk we would run out of water. And I thought, as we were approaching the climax of the crisis, I thought, there is so much adaptation and rapid innovation going on around the whole city, 4 million people at a household level, business, government. Everybody was working out how on earth do we stay alive and avoid this catastrophe. But I thought there is no social mechanism for capturing all this innovation and change. So with a filmmaker friend, I decided to raise some money, and we ended up interviewing in a film studio 39 people who were involved in responding to the drought, mostly senior people in the public and private sector, NGOs and so on. And that was such a lesson in what it takes to live through and steer through a major crisis, an existential crisis, if you're in a responsible position. And it was clear that for many of the people we interviewed, this was the first chance they'd had to really reflect and speak about this traumatic series of events. So that really stirred my thinking about the importance of good leadership in a major crisis, because there were examples of not so good leadership, and there was the opposite. And just as we wrapped up that project at the end of 2019, I was talking with the nonprofit foundation that had funded that in London, and they said, this was a very successful project, what shall we do next? And we were talking about it, and along came COVID. And I said to them, let's not wait until after it's finished and then interview people who were involved in responding. Can't we do it while it's happening? And so we found 12 leaders around the world, chief resilience officers in major cities and senior executives in big corporations. And for 16 weeks, from April till August in 2020, I went on Zoom and interviewed each of them for half an hour, asking them, what's happening? How are you managing? What are you learning? And this was deeply affected me, and I think was very helpful to them to have this little oasis of time each week when they could actually just talk without anybody listening about what was going on for them as leaders. And at the end of this whole project, I put together quite a lengthy report. Actually, it was a sort of a book, but for various reasons, we never published it. And then my friend Gareth Morgan, who had been and is still a very senior executive in the City of Cape Town administration, who had been part of the leadership team in the drought and the pandemic crises, we were sitting one day and he said, I think we should write a book about this. We've learned an enormous amount and I think we could share it. And that was the beginning of the book. So we spent most of 2024 writing it and published it at the beginning of 2025. And we decided from the start not to make it an academic book, but a short book written for leaders who are busy people, just to stir their thinking around the idea. And here's the central idea for the book. I don't know if I'm jumping ahead, but the central idea for the book is, if you as a leader see what we see, which is that we are going into an era where there will be more crises, there will be more complex, there will be more severe than we're used to, then if you're serious about leading, if you enjoy leading, if that's your mission in life, why not become excellent at leading in crises? And whatever the crisis is, we think there is a relatively small number of things that you could do which can make a big difference to you and your team and your people when a major crisis strikes. So that was the motivation for us to write the book. So why we wrote it together and not separately? Interesting question, because it's, as life happens, he suggested it, I said yes, and we just sort of got on with it. But looking back on it, I couldn't have written it on my own. I don't think he could have written it on his own, because there are two fundamental aspects to what we're saying in the book, which we cover differently. I cover principally the personal dimension of leadership in a major crisis. Like, what do you as a leader need to reflect on in advance of and during a major crisis about your own leadership? And then Gareth has a masterful understanding of the organizational structure that is going to put you as a leader in a good position when you go into a crisis, and how to manage that as you go through the crisis. So I think that gives us the sort of yin and yang of the task. And it was actually it was a remarkably pleasurable process, because I think we both learned an enormous amount from each other's experience, and we both have very different writing styles, and we learned how to blend those. So it was an exciting project. I think what makes the book unusual, and there's quite a literature around disaster management, and that's obviously of huge interest. That, what do you do if there's various types of disaster, and there are a lot of disaster-related professionals who do extraordinary work, emergency response professions as well. There's that, and then on the other hand, there are the organizational crisis communications professionals, people who handle crises, usually at an organizational level. When an organization hits a crisis because something bad has happened to or inside the organization, and suddenly the public or their customers want to know, then you have what's called a crisis in the organization. And there's a lot of literature about how to respond well to that kind of crisis. There's very little about how you, as a leader responsible for a large team or a whole organization, may need to respond when there is a major crisis. And I need to distinguish what we mean by a major crisis. So we're not talking about when there's a sort of a scandal in the boardroom. That's not our interest. Our interest is in when there is a crisis where normal life inside and outside your organization comes to a kind of halt. So another way of looking at it is that you're in a major crisis when you go out of your organization, drive home, or walk in the streets, and you realize everybody else is in the same crisis. So pandemic is an obvious one. The drought is an obvious one. There will be others. It could be a localized major climatic event like a big flood or a heat wave. These things affect huge numbers of people in a local area. And so, first of all, we're talking about only those kinds of major crises, and that is unusual in the literature. And secondly, we are talking directly to leaders, and we're saying, yes, you may have plans delivered to you by professionals for what to do when the power grid goes down, what to do when there is a major climate event. And they'll be sitting on your shelf, and they will have a lot of useful information. But as a leader, you are not going to spend the first few hours of a crisis reading through these plans. And our experience is that actually they have their place at a lower level in the organization. They give you a lot of information. But for the leader, they're going to have to take a quite different approach, regardless of the origin of the crisis. We're saying one or two things. The first is, and this is kind of, it's like common sense, but it's actually quite advanced common sense, because we're saying that in a crisis, your people have a quite different need of your leadership. They don't just want you to tell them the information about how the company is doing or where the company is going next or what our new strategy is and rah-rah. This is a very human thing, that when we know we are in danger, we look to those who are our elders, our seniors, our leaders, for reassurance that they are not panicking, for one. So that requires a certain mastery of their own process, which is, I shorthand that to that they are grown-ups, that you want a grown-up in the room. In fact, you would like your whole executive to be populated with grown-ups who recognize the scale of the danger. They recognize the degree of worry that their people are going to be going through, and at the same time are able to sit together and have rational, quick conversations about what is best to do. And all of that requires a level of self-control, self-mastery, and quick thinking that is either present or is not. It's not something that you can suddenly magic out of thin air. And this speaks to the question of, well, how do you build a leadership team that is going to do well in crisis? So it goes to recruitment and promotion and so on. The way I would extend out of that is that your communication with your people has got to be frequent enough. People thrive on good quality information. They can do almost anything so long as they know what they're up against. And at the same time, there will be things which you would be wise not to share with them just yet. And that's a mature judgment you're asking for. The other thing that I find really interesting about the discussions I had with Gareth and the stories he told me about how they in the City of Cape Town administration responded to both of these major catastrophes was the leadership decided they had to have a crisis management team that was slightly different in its composition from the regular executive team that would meet on a weekly basis in normal times. So it is the leader's job to decide who do I really need in my daily meetings, maybe even twice daily meetings when the crisis is at its peak? And who out of my senior team do I ask, please will you manage the ordinary operations that are in your control? Because we have to keep the organization going. But I need a crisis team with whom we're going to simply focus on the crisis. And so you're running two organizations. It's quite a difficult thing to get your head around, but it can make all the difference if people realize, oh, I still have to go in and do my job, and there are people who are making sure I do my job, and I know that there is a team really focusing on this crisis. I would say those are the principal things that we're asking of the leader of themselves. We suggest the leader takes a structural look at their organization's readiness to be good in a crisis, alongside their own personal lens. And the structural lens has two parts. The first part is that our understanding is that every major crisis evolves in 4 distinct phases. It sounds a bit sort of crass to say that, but try us. I mean, we think it's true. But there is the first phase is before the crisis. We sometimes refer to it as peacetime, when there isn't a crisis and the temptation is to just do your normal stuff and not worry about crises, because surely it's not going to come, or it'll come tomorrow, not today. So during that time, there's a whole lot of things can be done, which cannot be done during the crisis. The second phase is what we call the breaking of the wave, when you suddenly realize, oh, we are in a crisis. And there's a bunch of tasks that the leadership and the leadership team has to undertake in that phase. And they, in a way, set the course for how the organization will respond to the whole crisis. Very critical, but it's often a very short period of time. It can be hours or days. And then there's what we refer to as the turbulence. That's the third phase, where it is just managing the turbulence, the crisis within the crisis that we refer to. Simple example with the pandemic. It looks like a health crisis as it's arriving. And so your thinking is, how do we prevent people dying? But very quickly you realize, oh, hold on, we've got major supply chain problems and no flights coming into our airports. So certain businesses, tourism, for example, crashes. And then you've got secondary crises. Unemployment suddenly becomes an issue, et cetera, et cetera. So those are the crises within the crises which you can't foresee, you can't plan for, but you have to deal with. So that we call the turbulence. And then the fourth phase is, and we attach a lot of importance to this. In a way, our book is a reflection of this, which is the recovery from the sort of preparing to recover, because you can see, okay, it's coming to an end. How do we want to come out of this? And then the reflection, vital, because of course the temptation when you are a leadership team coming out of a really stressful, traumatic period, which can, in the case of the drought and the pandemic, last for more than a year, you long for normal. And of course, when normal arrives and you can stand down from your crisis mode or your crisis team, you've got an in tray this tall of ordinary things that you should have been paying attention to but couldn't. And what we're saying is, you need to rest. You need to have somebody interview you in a calm way about, what did you actually learn? What went really well? What would you advise to someone in your role going into the next crisis? And what do you look back on and say, this didn't work well? We have to think up together as a team about how never to have to be in that position again, and so on. And if you don't make time for that, and if you don't have that intention to become good after one crisis because you're going to find yourselves in another one, then we think it's not good leadership. You've actually undersold your potential, and it doesn't take a lot of time or resources. So those are the 4 phases. So that's one part of the structure. And the second part is we identify 6 capabilities, organizational capabilities, which during peacetime, we recommend that you build and strengthen. And very quickly, they are your ICT, information communication technology. I mean, look at what being able to operate online did for us in the pandemic. And there were companies who were not well set up for that. Data management. If you haven't got a really good fix on what is actually happening in your organization, particularly if you're multinational and so on, then how can you as a leadership team manage rapid change? So high quality data management and analysis, project management skills. Sounds very sort of obvious, but what the city of Cape Town found was that to have a team to which the leadership team could turn, sort of a bunch of project managers, and say, we've got to test this possibility now. Like, can you give us something in 2 days' time? And to have a team who can just drop everything and know how to quickly mount a project and say, we think we could do it like this, go or not go. If you don't have that capability, then you'll be struggling to find who can I ask to go and think about this possibility for us. So that's a third one, project management, hugely important skill. Then there's your supply chain adaptability. I mean, that's everybody experienced that in COVID. It ought to be obvious. And then what's the word for it? Partnerships and networks, like being able, the time to build a real relationship with your local municipalities, wherever you have sites, is long before the big crisis. And during the drought, particularly in Cape Town, we found it incredibly rich when big companies who had a lot of employees, a lot of plant in Cape Town started really thinking creatively with the city about how to talk to the population about bringing down water consumption. Hugely effective. But if you haven't got those relationships, it takes time to build. So those are the kind of things that in the book, we talk about how to build those in advance and then how to tweak them as the crisis unfolds. I think if there's one idea I would like leaders to take out of the book, it is that crisis brings clarity in a way that normal times cannot. And although you will feel pain and stress and possibly huge anxiety in different phases of a major crisis, if you go into it realizing that this is your moment to lead, people will need the best out of you, and the best is in you somewhere, then this is a wonderful time to be leading in a major crisis. So embrace it and do a little bit of homework beforehand. Even a little bit of homework beforehand will pay big dividends. And people all around your organization will appreciate that you're not panicking, that you've got an idea what a crisis means. Yeah.